Well, good morning, good night, good afternoon, wherever, whatever, whenever you're listening to this. This is a new format for us, a new setting of things that we're doing around church. And we thought 4th of July weekend, since we were Sabbath resting, this would be a good opportunity to introduce, possibly, if people like it, possibly a new format or a new um, opportunity for us to have some conversations about things and even invite some friends into conversations and talk about things in a different format than just doing a Sunday morning sermon. So, welcome to the Anchor podcast, or I don't know what we're going to talk about it or call it, but this is in place of Sunday morning this week as our sermon, but maybe we'll come up with a better name, or maybe it'll just be the podcast. But welcome, and we're glad you tuned in. We're glad you're listening. Like I said, this is a chance for us to have some conversations about things, talk about some things, talk about what does God say, but also talk about how does it relate to real life. What is the tension of some of these things? And so that's what we're going to do. So if people like it, maybe we will make it a regular thing where I can invite some friends to conversations and other pastors and different people to have those talks. So this is a trial run of it on our Sabbath rest weekend. We don't have church today. Obviously, it's July 3rd when we're recording this. We didn't have church, and hopefully everybody's taking a rest and enjoying the super nice weather and enjoying the long weekend. And so I invited Colin Stranathan. He is one of my former students. He is now a part of Anchor. He lives in the shell of a parsonage that is on our property with Noah, our youth lead. And I invited him into this conversation, and I'll let him talk here in a second. But he was one of my former students, went to Southeastern University, the greatest Bible college in America. That's where I went, and graduated just recently after like 5 years of being in school. And I thought he would be an appropriate person to invite into this conversation we're going to have today. Colin works at Starbucks, slinging lattes and frappuccinos to people, and white macchiatos or whatever they're called, and serving drinks. And he's works in a different industry right now than in the church world, so he gets some interaction with people that have different views and different alignments. But he's also a young adult, and as a church, we have a growing young adult ministry, and we have a good number of young adults. I wouldn't say it's majority of our church, but there's a strong number of young adults in our church. And so I think they're in a season of life that's even different from me. I'm almost 40, and so I'm becoming more and more disconnected from that season. And I think we have a large portion of our church that's in that season. And some of the tensions as we talk about these things, they're experiencing a different way than adults are. And so I thought it'd be good to have him in. So, Colin, welcome to whatever we're calling this, the podcast of champions of life, Anchor podcasting. Glad you're here. Why don't you can, I don't know, you can share something. I kind of gave you a
Yeah,
clip notes.
I mean, thanks for having me. It's been really cool getting kind of a different scenery in life, and taking you know uh, just another chapter to just kind of like learn some things about myself, learn about how God's knit me, learn how to interact with different kinds of people. And so that's why I think that a lot of this conversation today hopefully helps you in some kind of way, and I hope that it helps me too, because I don't claim to have all the answers, and I know that I probably still won't go forth. We're always learning, always growing, so it's awesome.
Yeah, I think I'm excited to. I don't usually get to have dialogue about things. It's usually preaching, and this is a chance to have some dialogue and talk about it. But I'm excited to have you. Excited you're up here, people to get to know you a little more. Colin interned for 5 years at a church down in Canton and came crawling up to Toledo. Wanted to get down on the streets of Sylvania.
Oh, you know it.
He's a big fan of Inside the Five. You know, he's living that downtown Sylvania life. I'm trying to get him on the J&G's pizza because it's the best. You haven't been there yet, have you?
No, I haven't. I've yet to be. I've been by it quite a bit, but haven't tried it.
You love Jets though. You like that Jets pizza.
Oh, I love that deep dish. That's what I'm about.
Two thumbs down. J&G's. Get
Nah.
the full slices of bacon on there. They have a spit of like meat that they'll cut off onto your pizza. And,
Yeah, I mean, now that you mentioned the bacon, it's just like, okay, man, maybe I do have to try this sooner
listen,
than later.
we love J&G's. It's almost like the Hunger Games trying to get in there sometimes because they'll have a line out the door. But I
High
saw that
demand.
they just bought the place next door, so they'll have more seating actually. So they're trying to compete with Inside the Five downtown. But how are you enjoying Sylvania? You enjoying living here?
Oh yeah, I'm enjoying it. You know, where I'm from, there's not a whole lot around there. You got Walmart, you got Taco
You
Bell.
better you have
That's about
Walmart.
it.
That's it.
That's all you get. And then everything else around it is just cornfields for miles.
You guys got that one Mexican restaurant though.
What, Jalisco?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Jalisco is good. Oh, they also recently, as I'm moving away, get a drive-through Chipotle, as they call
I'm
it, the
sure.
Chipotle Lane. That's interesting.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's nonstop all the time though. It's probably a nightmare to get in there.
Oh, it was for the first couple of months for sure. I went one time in that period and I was like, oh man, all right, I'll come back in a half hour. Because you're just picking up your mobile orders,
You have to go right when they open or you don't get in.
pretty much.
So it's drive through only.
Well, no, they have the drive through and then they have the inside open too. They have a little bit of outdoor seating as well. But I'm like, when it comes to Chipotle, I'm a mobile order guy. So I like to
Salem's. Oh
get those
no,
points.
see that's a rookie mistake because they jip you on the meat. So if you mobile order, they don't you can't verify that they're giving you a hearty amount of toppings of protein
Hmm,
on there.
you got a point.
You need to change your ways. So
I guess I do.
so Colin's been hanging out with our young adults and with our youth, hanging out with helping Noah. Him and Noah have been lifelong friends. I don't know if it's really lifelong, but feels like a lifetime. So he's helping out with youth. But I wanted to have a conversation today, and I wanted to get your thoughts and kind of think. I had been preaching on the triangle. If you haven't listened to those sermons, go back and check them out. I have been preaching on the triangle and talking about our up in and out relationships. And so, this idea of us having a balanced walk, balance in our life, and the fact that even if you're not a Christian, this idea that you need to have something that's spiritually feeding your soul. You need to have something that is connecting you with a small group of people that feed you also. And then we also need to connect with people outside of our circle because if you're always just facing in, you're missing opportunities to help people and whatever it is. For us that believe in Jesus, we know where like we have to have an up relationship with God where our worship and our prayer. And we have inward relationships where iron sharpens iron and we're discipling each other. Colin was in that huddle group with Noah and Seth where we met for like 2 years straight where that happened. But then we also have relationships that take us outside of those circles and hopefully even outside of our churches. And so I wanted to have this conversation. What I don't want in this podcast or conversation is for things to turn political all the time. So I want to stay away from that. But I do want to talk about the tensions in real life. And right now, regardless of where you land, there's a lot of tension between people. And as I've been, I have a group of pastors that I talk with, on a regular, sometimes every day. And one of the things that we've been talking about and I've been thinking about is this idea of loving your neighbor, because Jesus, I think, three different times that are recorded in the Gospels, talked about this idea of loving your neighbor, loving those around you, praying for your enemies, praying for the people that persecute you, um, laying your life down for those around you. Even to the point in Matthew where he says, I think it's Matthew 22, where he says, love your neighbor as yourself, for there's no greater commandment than this. And so this idea of what does that mean in our lives? And what does it mean for our Christian walk, specifically for our outward relationships? One of the things we challenged in church was we're taking this Sabbath rest weekend, we're taking a break from our normal services and those things, so people can have opportunities to connect with their neighbors, to connect with people. I was with one family, actually. Again, it's July 3rd today. I don't know when people are listening to this or whatever, but I was with one family today, dropping off my kid to go hang out with them, actually. And man, they had bought inflatables and were grilling out meat and doing this huge block party, just everyone coming together and hanging out. And this idea of just connecting with people outside of our circles, uh, and how it's important for us to do, and how it's important for us to live this way, and all the things that we've been talking about. But where does loving your neighbor fit into that? That's been like something that I think it's easy to love our neighbor when people agree with us. So Colin, like you've been a student of mine, you've been around, now you're an adult, and it's easy to love your neighbor. It's easier to love those relationships, to engage in those things when people are always telling us the things that we want to hear, when we agree with them, when we like it. But that becomes a lot more difficult when people disagree with us, or they begin to push on our lives in a way that don't align with what we think. And unfortunately, what I see happen a lot of times is we turn our back on people, we disconnect with people, we get angry with people. And I think it's interesting when Jesus talks about these things. Again, in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says, you've heard it said to love your neighbor and to hate your enemy. But he actually takes it a step further and says, like, love your neighbor and pray for those that persecute you, pray for those enemies. So I don't know what your experience is, Colin. I know, like I mentioned in the beginning, you work in a very opposite of your faith sometimes environment, and it's just coffee, but you have a lot of people that would probably disagree with you and a lot of what you believe or how you feel about things. And it's easy to put your head down and just make coffee, but those things kind of slip out sometimes. And so I wanted you to share a little bit of what you've been to Bible college, you worked around people, you work in a non-church environment right now. I think what are some of the tensions that you find? And I don't want to ask a ton of questions. I want this more to be a conversation, but this is where I've been wrestling with, because I think right now we're seeing people just dig their holes in their heels in the sand. And I think we should live under conviction, and we should live for what we believe. But can you love your neighbor and still do that? Can you feel strongly and live by conviction and pursue holiness and pursue like God's presence and yet still love your neighbor? And it sounds really good, and it sounds really churchy, but it is not always easy.
It's not easy at all. It sounds great. It preaches well. It does get you hyped up whenever you're in a church setting and you hear from whoever's preaching, like, go out there and love God and love people. It's like, that sounds great. And it's just,
Looks
for
good
me,
on
I
a
know
t-shirt.
that, yeah, I know that whenever I go to work, I hear plenty of things that, maybe I disagree with, or maybe are just slightly off color. And instead of me correcting it and giving, my opinion, I think that I've come to realize that over time, like, people don't really care about your opinion, and they don't care about how much you know, but they want to know that you care. And I
Mhm.
think, where I'm at, like, it's sometimes it's better to just love the individual and meet them where they're at, rather than, just
That
trying
that
to share
sounds really
truth.
good though. That
It
sounds
it
really
does.
good, but I think like, what does that mean for us then? I think that's where the tension that I'm seeing in the world right
Mhm.
now is that we can say like we're gonna love the individual and we're gonna meet people where they're at, but what does that do to our relationships with people? Like how do you disagree, and how do we live in an environment that sometimes is almost volatile, right? Like it's almost like toxic the way people interact with each other. Um, there was a point in the last week where I was like, I'm just not going on social media, uh,
Mhm.
and it wasn't. I mean, it was everybody. I'm like, what we. I guess that's where the tension that as I read these things that Jesus said, and all the different times, and in the Gospels, and um, Luke writing Jesus's words as he says, like, do good to those who hate you. Uh, like, have we disconnected? I mean, I don't know. You're at a different age than me, so like, I have
Mhm.
kids, so like, uh, if you want to learn how to love people that don't listen to anything or believe anything you say, just have kids and wait till they turn like 10 years old, and like they're like, all right, Dad, we don't really care. Like, you're wrong. And I'm like, you're 10 years old. You don't know anything. Like, what do you mean I'm wrong? But like, you're kind of in this sweet age range. I think it's different for me. I think I'm in a different season of life where I was raised in a time when church really was a priority and God was a priority. Even if people didn't know God, they were or didn't engage with church, I guess I should say, maybe not knowing God, but I think I grew up in a time and lived in a time where uh, going to church or God was always something respected. So even if you didn't, I had friends that didn't go to church, but it was always respected that church was a priority in my life. To where I think you're growing up in a time and you're living in a time where it's almost like despised. So like your
Mhm.
values are despised by people, and you work at Starbucks. I mean, you work in a very like would be considered a more liberal environment, right?
Right.
Um, what is that tension for you? Because I think you give a different avenue. I think if you live in a vacuum and you live in a bubble, this is easy, right? Like it's
Right.
easy if you live, but when you get outside of that vacuum, when you get outside of that bubble, and for some people, you know, I have family members that don't agree with my beliefs at all, or they don't value the things that I value at all, or we value different things. Um, what I'm seeing is that people fight about those things when they engage with each other. And I'm sitting back and I've been there too, where I've been like, uh, you know, trying to prove a point and it's just creating a toxic environment. Um, and I sit back and I think like, where is loving your neighbor in the midst? Like, is it,
Mhm.
it's hard for me because if you're an Enneagram person, I'm an 8. So if you don't know what the Enneagram is, you can just fast forward this part. But I'm a strong-willed activator, deep conviction. I'm gonna fight. It's probably why like I, I'm gonna go in. I mean, you've known me long enough. Like, Colin, at any point have I not told you exactly what I thought when I think it? So it's easy for me to be like, we're just going to go in on this subject. Let's just, and I've had to learn the older I get that not everything needs talked about all the time.
Right.
Um, but I, at the same time, I have this tension inside where I'm like, maybe loving my neighbor is calling some things out. Is so where's that like where is that tension? Because the same man that said love your neighbor and prayed for a naked woman in the middle of the streets that was just caught in adultery and told her to go and sin no more and doesn't condemn her, walked into the temple and flipped tables and whipped people for like abusing the house of God. Like, where is the boundary? As a young person, as a young
Yeah.
adult, where you're thrust into the middle of this, where do you find the boundary? Because I think we all struggle with like how much is too much, and am I cowarding to culture by not saying what I think?
Right. It's definitely a challenging like tension to navigate. Like I know for me, like whenever I've had conversations with people at work, um, the thing that I've done over the years is I don't usually initiate these conversations. I think is we start to develop relationships with other people. What begins to happen is sometimes they'll ask us questions. And it's just a natural part of forming any relationship, right? You want to get to know somebody, you're going to ask questions about them. And so, through a lot of those questions and not having to say, look at me, I'm waving my flag, I'm a Christian, you know, just through those more organic conversations, it's been easier to have some of those harder conversations of what we agree with versus what I don't agree with. And same thing for the other side, being able to listen and
Yeah, I
hopefully
mean,
be
like,
able to
where have you
understand the
failed?
perspective.
Like, I guess that's where, um, like, we learn from our mistakes, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
we learn from the things we do poorly. Um, you work in an environment where if you come in guns blazing, you're going to get run out of the workplace, right?
Oh, 100%. And
Yeah.
the thing is that almost happened before. You know, I was at a different store, different Starbucks store, because I transferred. I've actually been working there for 3 years. But the store I worked at previously, there was someone, she actually identified as a witch. But, I was just kind of telling people that, like,
Oh, you tried to
hi, my
pray
name
it
is
out of
Colin.
her right in the middle of Starbucks, didn't you?
Oh, no. If only. What a scene that would have been. Flipping tables and everything. Just kidding. No.
Flipping lattes.
Yeah, but I was very outspoken about it. I was trying to just invite everybody to church. And I think some people got a distaste for that because they're like, well, this person's trying to change me. And it's like my heart behind it, even though like it might have been, well intentioned of like, yeah, I want people to encounter the living God. It still became this thing where I was, you know, super pushy. And I don't really know that like necessarily that like Jesus was like that or told us to be like that. When I say Jesus met people where they were at, like I think what happened is he encountered people and he saw, some of the things behind the scenes in their lives, which, for some people, maybe they were healed on the spot, maybe they weren't, maybe they're people that
Yeah, but I
he's
think
developed a
Jesus was
relationship with.
also like Jesus. So I think there's this tension, and I live in it. I get it. Is that it's easy to be passive, but Jesus was also really blunt,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is why some people have a hard time because Jesus was no fluff. Like if there was something that he felt strong about, he went right in. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I think makes it difficult for us, even as I've been thinking about it, like um, living in this world, I understand the complexities of um, you want me to be more like Christ, but Christ was at times blunt, and at other times he would
Mm-hmm.
almost cower to the conversation. And so, like, you don't know which way to live because uh, culture in the world is going to beat you over the head with what they believe. So it's
Yeah.
almost like this tension. Like I tell my kids, like I don't want you to be a fighter, but if someone comes at you and comes at you and comes at you, like I want you to fight back at some point. Like I don't want you to go out of your way to be aggressive, but I also don't want you to be a wuss. Does that make sense?
Right.
Like so, and so as Christians, like where is that line? Because there's also a lot of things in Scripture that tell us just take it on the chin, right?
Yeah.
Like just keep going and worship through your persecution and find joy in your suffering. All these verses that sound really good, and
They're not fun, you know?
yeah, but we champion them in the church,
Hmm.
and either the church is skewed so far away from the gospel, and we don't know how to live like that, or we've created our own narrative that's like the crusade version of Christianity, where we're just going to fight everything, and the trail of bodies behind the scenes is what it is, you know. So it's hard. Like I think it's hard. I think
Hmm.
what people are facing. I think even what you talk about, like what you're facing in the workplace, or what young people are facing. Again, I grew up in a different time. Like we
Hmm.
weren't talking about these things when I was in elementary, middle school, high school. Uh, you've kind of grown up around it, almost to the point where it's not normal, but it's not as like shocking. And I think that's what people don't understand is that the world has changed very quickly. Um, and living in that is difficult. So I think you're
Hmm.
faced on a daily basis with something that uh, most of us don't understand. Because by the time you hit your like late 30s, early 40s, you're in a career, you found a job that you're settling into, and people might disagree with you, but you're kind of in your, what you're doing. I'm a pastor. Like I'm with church people. Like I sit in meetings where people are arguing over like baptism and communion and things that are like, and I'm like, it's almost exhausting because I feel like it's so disconnected from the real world of what
Hmm.
people, are wrestling with.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know how do you. I guess I will ask you questions. How do you in this and I'll share a little bit too. But what are some practical ways, I guess, I would say that you practice this idea of loving your neighbor, or um, and not in a cheesy Christian way. Like what what does it look like to um, have people cramming their agenda down your throat, and you want to
Yeah.
fight back, and you want to fight it, right? Like you want to speak up, and maybe you do sometimes, or maybe you don't. Like what's that look like? What's that look like for you? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, that's if I'm completely transparent, like that's like an area that like I am very challenged in. Not because I don't have plenty of disagreements. I definitely do. Um, I think for me, like my personality. Like for those of you who don't know me, like I'm a little bit more passive. So it's kind of easier for me to just like, let's just move on from that subject. But whenever you're in an environment with people and they have genuine questions, like what are you going to do? Are you going to turn it down? And for me, I just don't know that I can do that anymore because I know when people find out that I'm a Christian and that I'm following Jesus, like again, like the questions do pop up of like, why do you why do you believe this when clearly like there's something like flawed about it in their eyes, um, especially with a lot of like recent events and stuff. But it's a challenge for me. I don't, for me, like being blunt isn't my strong suit, but I know that sometimes it is necessary. Um, but when it comes to those environments and being around people that aren't in church or haven't necessarily known or followed God, or maybe people that have been to church, but maybe they're hurt by the church. Um, it's very challenging because sometimes you have to be very aware of people's hurt. You have to be aware of those things. And it's like, either I can just sit here and like let what they're saying hurt me, or maybe I can, take some social cues and recognize that maybe there's some hurt behind the
Yeah.
scenes for them. But I can't assume that, right? That's the other
Yeah, but
challenge. Like,
I think that's a good point with the idea of um, we get goggles on our eyes, right? Like we're so tunnel visioned. Um, it's like me telling my kid to try something new, but there's pizza on the counter, and I'm like, but you're gonna really like this pasta. No, but I love pizza, and I know I love pizza, and so and it's not even, maybe this is a bad analogy, but it's not like you're trying to like something else, but it's just being open to seeing what's there. And I think what
right,
Jesus did so well is he saw people for where they were, and then he invited them into the, like, he connected. He wasn't so tunnel visioned on like build the church, do this, but he was like, I can build the church if I can connect with this person, if I can see this person for where they're at right now, even if it's in the wrong place. And I think what we've fallen into the trap too is building our empires or our kingdoms. And we're good. Like if you come into the front doors of our building, or we can get you here, you can become a part of the kingdom. But what we do a bad job at is seeing maybe where someone is sitting in their humanity, um, and sitting with them. And we're even all right, I think, a lot of times in the church. And I guess this isn't, and I'm not trying to preach on here, but I think what we do is that we allow ourselves to sit with people for a certain amount of time. So we'll say, like, I will sit with you in your humanity. I will sit with you in your brokenness if it fits into this window. So if it takes you 3 months, I'm good. But if we start hitting 6 months, 7 months, if it means I have to walk with you for a year, well, then we need to send you somewhere else, and you don't want to move or whatever. And I think um, Jesus loved people just for their humanity. He saw them as humans. Um, I think even to the point sometimes that it made the Pharisees mad because he wasn't looking at their brokenness. He
mm,
just saw them for who they were.
yeah,
And I wonder, as what I believe our world is moving toward a post-Christian world. Like I don't think we're unchurched. I think we're post-church. I think what I've seen is a lot of people have gone through church, been hurt by church, walked away from church, or are in church, whatever. But I think um, if we're going to reach people and advance the gospel, then we're going to have to learn to love people in their humanity, even when it doesn't align with us, even when
yeah,
it means you have to build a relationship with someone that says they're a witch. And what is that? That's messy, and that's uncomfortable, and that's work for you. Um, but what I see in Jesus is that Jesus was tired a lot. I think people's humanity, he loved people for their humanity, but it's burdensome. And so he would get
hmm
away a lot. He would spend, I actually believe he engaged with the disciples because it gave him life to not have to sit under the heaviness of people's lives during those moments. Even though his disciples were messy, there was life in there that they were sharpening, they were hungry at least. Um, and so I just wonder as I've been watching the last couple weeks and even the last couple years, um, have we disconnected from viewing people as human and looking at people the way Jesus did, of saying like there's a, I think you brought up a really good point of just seeing that they might not align with you, but there's something that led them to that point. And for them,
Right.
their feeling and their hurt, um, or their conviction, even if you view it as wrong conviction, to them it is right.
Hmm.
And there's a pathway to walk with people through that. Um, and I think it's still messy when you begin to push on it and have conversation. But I think it's a long process to earn the right to even speak into someone's life on certain things. And as Christians, we don't do that well. We don't sit with people. We don't invite people like into our lives for a long enough time that they have. See, what Jesus did so well is people had such a great love for him that they would allow him to then push on their life. Um, and I don't think we do that well. I don't think as Christians we do that well.
Right.
And I think that's why Jesus is always saying, like, love your enemies. Like, even those who you would view opposite of you, sit with them. Like, he sat with the Roman soldiers. And even though the Pharisees we love to bring up because he calls them out, it's interesting they were always still sitting at the table with him. They were always still in the crowd with him. He was always still engaging with them. Judas, he knew was going to betray him, and he is still invited to the supper, right? So what does that look like? And I think that's hard. I keep going. There's a verse in Luke chapter 6, verse 35. It says, love your enemies and do good and lend and expect nothing in return. And your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, for he himself is kind to ungrateful and evil men. And that verse is really, I think if we would apply it, this is where I keep going to, because there are times as a pastor, especially this last week with all of the Supreme Court stuff and pro-choice and pro-life and all these things, I've had multiple people be like, Brent, where do you stand? Are you going to speak on it? Are you going to do stuff? And it's not that I don't have deep conviction. I've shared my story. It's not that I don't have strong feelings toward things. But is it the best way to love my neighbor to drive my flag into the ground? And just because I don't put a billboard up on the side of the highway or a Facebook post does not mean those conversations aren't happening. I just think that you have to earn the right into people's lives to have those conversations. And what we've become a culture of keyboard warriors, right? Is that the right term? Where we're
100%.
Yeah, we're like, I'm going to post it on Facebook and piss everyone off and have all like 300 comments of everybody arguing. And I sit back and I look at that and I say, where is the kingdom of heaven in the midst of this? Because what Jesus is saying in Luke chapter 6 is that you should just offer yourself up, that you should love those who disagree with you to the point that you don't even expect. I think what happens is we want to argue about stuff, we want to post stuff with the expectation that in return, people will change their view to us. But what Jesus is saying is that you should love people to the point that you don't even expect them to change.
Mm-hmm.
And what he says is that is when you love in that way, your reward will be great and you will be viewed as the children of God. And I wonder if the best message we can send is to stand up for what is right, to stand up for what is true, but do it in a way that is loving and engaging and not the toxic culture of just stirring up dysfunction. Because I think Jesus said controversial things, but I don't think he ever did it with the heart and the intent of just stirring things up.
Mm-hmm.
And I also understand that what I'm saying, a lot of people will disagree with, because people will manipulate it and say, like, well, then you don't stand for anything, and that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you earn the space into people's lives to begin to speak what you think, right? You love people in their humanity to understand their brokenness, and then maybe it gives you a little more context to speak the gospel and to give them a path toward Jesus. To allow him to do it, you know. And it's hard and it's messy, um, but I believe that that sentence is the hope of the world. I think when the body of Christ begins to love in a selfless, non-agenda way, I think we've allowed all kinds of things to infiltrate our faith. Like everything is almost political, and it's an arguing point, and it's something that like we have to argue our point, or the whole world's going to go. We already know the end of the story, right? Like we already know how this ends. The whole world is going to go to crap, and Jesus is the only thing that's going to redeem it. So your keyboard warrioring or your arguments around the Fourth of July table, are they just encouraging the toxic nature of the world, our flesh, or is it inviting people into the grace and hope of Jesus? Um, and I don't even know the answer all the time. I don't necessarily know where the line is to where you speak up, but I do know when I look at the life of Jesus, he always listened. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I guess that's where I go back to with what we've been talking about, is that like if I can sit with someone and expect nothing in return other than to just be there, then I know I'm at least aligned with Christ and what he said. Because those are the things that Jesus said, you'll be viewed as a child of God. This isn't that what he does for all of us. You know what I mean? Like we like to flaunt our Christianness, but we've all rejected Jesus at some point. We've all fought back on it. And it was only through his grace and patience that we all sit where we're at right now. You know?
Yeah.
I'm sure you've been there, and we've all been there, you know. We love to argue too. I mean, come on. We'll argue about music. We'll argue about food. Like, don't even get me in the same room with the Cruz family, and we'll argue about sports. I got a Lakers shirt on right now, and if John was sitting here, he'd be giving me crap about it. Like, I think we are just toxically drawn toward arguing, right?
Yeah.
Like even the Pharisees, as Jesus is saying these things, they're saying they don't have Facebook to post on, but they're saying things to try to stir it up in the crowd, and Jesus is always pushing back on it. So, I don't know. I don't know like what you're in a different environment. I mean,
Yeah.
you have to take a lot on the chin. But I guess what I would say is that most of it doesn't go in vain. I think a lot of times we think it just is unnoticed and it doesn't matter. And like the Lord sees it. And I think there's fruit from it too, even, you know.
Yeah. And I mean too, like us being patient with other people, you know, when we have those conversations. I do really like what you said about examining like social media and thinking about like, is what I'm saying actually productive? Is it life-giving? Does it reflect the nature of the kingdom of God? Like, I think those are solid questions to ask. And I think too, if, you know, if we're supposed to be people that love God and love people, are we creating safe spaces for people? Because I think people in general are just on edge. I don't know if that's a direct thing from social media or whether it's um, just how our society's evolved. But I think, you know, a lot of our answers can, you know, we can pretend to know everything, but we don't. And the problem with something like social media is everybody's on edge. And so people just want a safe space. People want a space to be themselves. Um, in a culture that was once about like individuality is now all about labels all of a sudden. And everybody celebrates their labels. And it's like, I just want to celebrate you. And that's like
Yeah,
a
I mean,
hard thing
wasn't
to
that
say
the
to somebody,
basis
right?
of the church? Like, wasn't that the basis of the church in the New Testament, was just being a place that people could gather? I mean, you had Jews and Gentiles and people that
100%.
completely disagreed and were like, but they laid it down in a way that they laid there. And that's why Paul like even condemns them at some point and says like, the church is not growing because you're celebrating your differences rather than celebrating Jesus. And I wonder
Mm-hmm.
if like we're having these conversations about the church in 2022 where we're like, churches are closing and the church is shrinking and the Christian family, and it's not that I disagree with any of these things, but the Christian
Mm-hmm.
values are under attack from the world, and we're almost celebrating all of these things rather than getting back to Jesus.
Yeah.
That's why I love worship. Like that's why I love, me and John talk about all the time. I love worship because I feel like it's the one time. Like I can get up and preach on a Sunday and somebody is going to disagree with something I say. Guaranteed. You get enough people in a room, somebody's going to disagree. But worship, other than some people really out there, is the one part of the service where like you can watch a room center together because our focus is on him. And I wonder if we took that posture every day when we approach even like our family gatherings and the people that we disagree with. I wonder what it would look like. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
I get dysfunction. I'm from a dysfunctional home. Like I don't even talk to some of my siblings, and I wonder, like, if we could take this posture of like sitting in His presence with no agenda. Jesus says it right there. Expect nothing in return. Like give yourself to people, lay yourself down, and don't expect that. Expect to get walked all over. And I mean, He's laying out the cross, right? Like He
Mm-hmm.
put it all down and laid it out and expected nothing in return. And He said, for that, you'll be known as children of God. So I don't know. I guess that's the tension. Those are the things I'm wrestling with right now. I think if we're honest, we're all wrestling with it. Uh, you're about to go hang out with a bunch of teenagers and they're going to work
Oh,
you in
yeah.
basketball and you're going to be tired and it's hot. And, again, those are the settings where it's easy.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's hard, it's easy.
Right.
When you get together with your family at Christmas and you have to sit in a room with blank, or you go to work and everybody seems like they're against what you know to be true. It's a lot harder. So I think it's a daily posture. I guess that's where I've found myself recently, is that not every argument I want to have needs to be had. Not everything that I even think needs to be had needs to be had. You know what I mean? Like I think our minds and hearts can deceive us a lot of times, and we feel like I have to do this right now. And I've recently started taking the posture of like I'm going to give it 24 hours, because people recently, you know, are like, what do you think about this? Why don't are you going to speak? And I'm like, I'm going to think about it for 24. I don't need to make a decision right now. I don't need to decide. And I think that in that time, I'm going to ask the Holy Spirit to really lead me and speak, because if I just shoot off my hip or just shoot whatever, I'm ADHD, so who knows what the heck's flying through my head half the time. But like if I just shoot off whatever is in my head in the moment, that's usually when I find myself in trouble. Um, but if I center on Jesus and I say, God, what do you want to say, with no agenda, nothing in return, nothing. That's where I find clarity from the Spirit. And I think that's what Paul tells us. Like, Take everything before the Lord. Let the Holy Spirit convict you and guide you and lead you, because we get in our own way a lot of the time, and I think we ruin the message of the gospel. We don't view people as human. We don't realize that we pick arguments with people and fights because we don't realize we view their view as wrong rather than they're sitting in their humanity in that moment. And so, can I love you even in that place? Is the challenge. Jesus speaks to the woman at the well and offers her eternal life. She doesn't even like ask for forgiveness for her sins. Even the woman caught in adultery, she never like even says like, Jesus, forgive me. Like, we think there's a prayer and a package and whatever. Like, we don't know. He just sees her for who she is. And he offers it with no expectation. So I wonder what our lives would look like, what the world would look like, how we would treat people. That's the church that I'm hungry to see. As you guys are young adults and you're growing up in the midst of this, like, that's what I want to see. I want to see our ministries, our youth ministries, young adult ministries, people, relationships. Luke chapter 6, verse 35. Go read it this week. So thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks for having me. It was cool to talk and be able to hear a little bit of your perspective based on some of the things that I've experienced out in the world, out in the workplace. It's definitely challenging. I think for me personally, like, very, very often I ask that question, where's the line? How much do I share? Should I even ask this question? And, I think I'm realizing more and more that there's a lot more answers that come from getting to know people and, viewing people in their humanity the way that Jesus would, and just see people that this is where they are. This is just where they are.
And I think people need to understand, seeing people where they are doesn't mean accepting how they are.
Right.
But when you see people where they are, you don't have to, you see them as human, not the choices that they make or the choices that they believe.
Right.
And that's where the Holy Spirit comes into play. I think we try to be the Holy Spirit. So we don't, if we just see people for who they are, and again, we live in truth, like we believe in truth. There is a line where you stick to your truth, but that's a long drawn out process, I think, longer than we
and it's way messier.
Oh yeah.
But sometimes God will surprise you and it'll be way more rewarding than you expect.
And sometimes it's not long, and you'll find out that it's a lot faster than even you thought,
Definitely.
So I don't know. I think it's something we're all struggling with. I think it's important stuff. I don't know if this was too heavy or too not, but I think it was relevant to, if we're pushing people to say, go have outward relationships, that means what we're really saying is go have messy relationships with people. That's text messages when you don't want them. That's spending time with teenagers and coworkers. And how do you love the girl that's a witch that you work with, right? Like, that's
right.
That's weird. Like, that's a hard place to be. So, but it's what Jesus is calling us to. It's a relationship he's calling us into. So I think it's
absolutely
good. So, man, I appreciate you hopping on. I appreciate you just talking for a little bit, sharing what it's like to be a young adult, slinging coffee drinks with people thinking you're crazy, you thinking people are crazy, getting yelled at because people's mobile orders are lost.
Oh, it's the best. Having drinks sent to the other store that's on the same road, drives us all insane. It's lovely.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful, man. Well, thanks, Colin. Thanks for coming on. I'm excited for especially people around Anchor to get to know you a lot more.
Excited to get to know people.
Here. living in Toledo and you're going to go to
Oh
J
yeah.
and G's Pizza because it is better than all that other rubbish.
I'll believe you when I try it.
You got to go and get it. It's so good.
All right.
It's the Superior, Sylvania, Ohio pizza place. And
The
don't
Superior
give me
Pizza
that Little
Place. You heard it here
Caesars.
first.
Don't give me
Oh, Little
Marco's.
Caesars is
Don't,
cardboard.
yeah, but your roommate would say otherwise, that it
Oh,
is
I know he
delightful.
would.
It's disgusting. That's it's because Noah's like a garbage disposal of food. So
Love it.
anyway, I'm glad to have you around. Glad to have you on today. Just as we are pursuing relationships with people, and it's a challenge every day. Love our enemy. Pray for people that persecute you. Lay yourself down. Offer yourself to people with nothing, expecting nothing in return. That's hard stuff, but that's the real life stuff Jesus talked about. So, man, I just pray. I pray whatever we talked about today. Hopefully, something encouraged you. Something maybe challenged you. This subject alone challenges me every day because I'm a fighter. Like I'm a natural fighter person. I want to argue about it drives my wife crazy because my wife is a peacemaker. She wants peace. And I'm like, no, we need to argue about things. We need to go in on it. And my wife gets stressed out, Lauren. That's why she's
Me
a
and
good
Lauren are on
wife.
the
She's
same
just,
wavelength.
whatever, Colin. You like to fight more than you let on. But
Yeah,
I
it's
love to
just
fight.
you. It's just you that I fight. Let's be real.
It's because I love to fight. So I'm gonna antagonize you.
You're
But
just gonna pull it out of me.
yeah, but I do. So this is challenging, and it challenges me, and I hope it challenges anyone else that's listening. But I hope it's good. I hope there's some clarity, or at least the beginning steps toward pushing people to be more like Christ and what He said, and even talking about the tension of what Jesus said, because I think we in the church world think we should just do whatever Jesus said, but like no, we should wrestle with it. Like it should, if it doesn't push on us a little, then I don't think we're really reading it or listening. So anyway, thanks so much, Colin. This was longer than I thought it was going to be, but I don't know. We've never done this before. Hopefully we'll keep doing it.
Here we
Hopefully
are.
it was good. Yeah. So if you liked it, comment on YouTube. I think it'll be on Spotify, on the podcast thing, Apple Podcasts. Like, review it, do all those things, share it with someone. But we'll be back in person next week, and then maybe we'll do one of these like a couple times a month with different people. Maybe we'll bring Colin back. He has to go try J and G's first, or he's not allowed back on. So
that's my homework.
Homework is eat J and G's, get the bacon because it is good, and then put some spinach on it so you feel healthy. And find Jesus in the midst of that pizza. But anyway, good time talking. Thank you, Colin. Appreciate you. Share this with someone, or if you didn't like it, don't even comment because I don't want to know, because I want to assume everybody liked it. So, all right, thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week.